The air crackled with forced cheer, the scent of pine and cinnamon doing little to mask the tension. My hands trembled as I set the last ornament on the tree, the glittering surface reflecting a distorted version of my own strained smile. They thought this performance would appease me, that tinsel and carols could erase what they'd done, but underneath the festive veneer, a storm was brewing, a cold, calculated fury that would soon shatter their fragile peace. The day they tried to bury me alive, that was the day they signed their own doom. If your heart aches for family betrayed, subscribe now. Christmas had always been my mother's domain. Every year, she transformed our home into a winter wonderland, meticulously orchestrating every detail, from the perfectly frosted sugar cookies to the flawlessly wrapped presents. It was a performance, a carefully constructed illusion of familial bliss. And for years, I played my part, dutifully admiring her handiwork and swallowing the bitter pill of her thinly veiled favoritism toward my younger sister, Bethany. Bethany could do no wrong in my mother's eyes, her every accomplishment lauded, her every flaw excused. I, on the other hand, was constantly measured against some impossible standard, my efforts consistently deemed insufficient. Still, I tried. I always tried. My name is Cora, and I desperately wanted my mother's love, a love that seemed perpetually just out of reach. This year, however, felt different. The air was thick with unspoken words, with a subtle shift in dynamics that made my skin crawl. My husband, David, had noticed it too. The way my mother's smiles didn't quite reach her eyes when she looked at me, the way she seemed to flinch whenever I entered the room. I dismissed it as holiday stress, the pressure of maintaining her perfect facade, but deep down, a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. The first crack appeared during dinner. We were gathered around the mahogany table, laden with roasted turkey and all the traditional trimmings. My daughter, Lily, a bright, inquisitive 6-year-old, chattered excitedly about her school play, her small face illuminated by the twinkling lights of the Christmas tree. My mother, usually so attentive to Lily, seemed distracted, her gaze drifting towards Bethany and her flawless children. "Lily, darling, that's lovely," she said, her voice sounding hollow, before turning back to Bethany to discuss the latest developments in her perfectly curated life. I watched, my fork hovering over my plate, as Lily's face fell, her chatter dwindling into a disheartened silence. It was a small thing, a seemingly insignificant slight, but it ignited a spark of protectiveness within me, a fierce determination to shield my daughter from the same emotional neglect I had endured for so long. Later, as we were clearing the table, I overheard my mother and Bethany whispering in the hallway.
Their voices were muffled, but I caught snippets of conversation, fragments of sentences that sent a shiver down my spine. "Can't keep it a secret forever," and "for the best, really," and "just has to know the truth." I tried to dismiss it as paranoia, the product of an overactive imagination fueled by years of insecurity, but the knot in my stomach tightened, twisting with a gnawing sense of dread. The bomb dropped after dessert. We were all gathered in the living room, the fire crackling merrily in the hearth, as my mother began her annual tradition of distributing presents. She handed out the gifts with practiced efficiency, saving the largest, most elaborately wrapped packages for Bethany's family. When it came time for Lily to receive hers, my mother paused, her face hardening with a cruel resolve that sent a jolt of fear through me. "Lily," she said, her voice laced with an icy disdain that I had never heard directed at my daughter before, "there's something you need to know." My blood ran cold. I knew with a sickening certainty that something terrible was about to happen. "You're not my granddaughter," she spat, the words hanging in the air like shards of glass. "Get out." Lily's eyes widened in confusion and terror, her small body trembling as she looked from my mother to me, her face a silent plea for explanation. The room was plunged into an eerie silence, broken only by the crackling fire and Lily's stifled sobs. My world shattered. In that moment, something inside me broke, the last vestiges of hope and longing dissolving into a cold, hard resolve. The woman I trusted most was one of them. The world swam before my eyes, the festive decorations now mocking reminders of the charade my life had become. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to shatter the carefully curated image of familial perfection that my mother so desperately clung to, but I couldn't, not yet. Lily's small hand gripped mine, her trembling fingers a silent plea for strength. I had to protect her. I had to get her out of this toxic environment. David, I managed to choke out, my voice barely a whisper. Take Lily home. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of shock and concern, but he didn't argue. He knew, without me having to say a word, that something terrible had just happened. He scooped Lily into his arms, her small body clinging to him like a lifeline, and carried her out of the house, leaving me alone to face the wreckage of my life. The moment they were gone, the carefully constructed dam inside me burst. How could you? I screamed at my mother, the words raw and guttural. How could you say that to her? She's your granddaughter. My mother remained impassive, her face a mask of cold indifference. She's not, she repeated, her voice devoid of any emotion. David isn't her father.
The revelation hit me like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. I stumbled backward, my hand flying to my mouth in disbelief. What? I gasped, the word barely audible. What are you saying? Bethany stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with a malicious satisfaction that sent a chill down my spine. It's true, Cora, she said, her voice dripping with venom. David isn't Lily's father. I am. The world tilted on its axis, the room spinning around me in a dizzying vortex of betrayal and lies. My husband? With my sister? The two people I had trusted most in the world? It was too much. My mind struggled to process the enormity of the deception, the sheer depth of their depravity. No, I whispered, shaking my head in denial. No, it's not true. You're lying. My mother smirked, her eyes glinting with a cruel triumph. Ask David, she said, her voice laced with a chilling certainty. He'll tell you the truth. I didn't want to believe them. I desperately wanted to cling to the illusion of my perfect life, to the belief that my husband and my sister were incapable of such treachery. But deep down, a cold, hard knot of certainty told me that they were telling the truth, that everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie. I turned and fled, stumbling out of the house and into the cold night air, the weight of their betrayal crushing me with every step. Sleepless nights followed, filled with the tormenting replay of the evening's events. Each word, each glance, each carefully constructed lie echoed in my mind, fueling my anger and solidifying my resolve. I had to confront David. I had to hear the truth from his own lips. The next morning, I found him sitting at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. He looked up as I entered, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and fear. Cora, he began, his voice trembling. I can explain? Explain? I spat, my voice dripping with scorn. Explain how you could betray me like this? Explain how you could sleep with my sister and father a child with her? Explain how you could lie to me for 6 years? He flinched, his face contorting with pain. It just happened, he mumbled, his eyes darting away from mine. It was a mistake. I didn't mean for it to happen. A mistake? I repeated, my voice rising in disbelief. A 6-year-long mistake? A mistake that resulted in a child? A mistake that has destroyed my life? He didn't answer, his silence a tacit admission of guilt. In that moment, any lingering shred of love or affection I had felt for him vanished, replaced by a cold, burning hatred. Get out, I said, my voice dangerously low. Get out of my house and out of my life. He didn't argue. He simply stood up, gathered his belongings, and walked out the door, leaving me alone in the ruins of my shattered existence. The days that followed were a blur of grief and anger. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I could barely function. The weight of their betrayal was crushing me, suffocating me. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of lies and deceit, with no hope of rescue. But amidst the despair, I would not let their actions define me. I would rise from the ashes of my broken life, stronger and more determined than ever before. The planning had begun. I started meticulously documenting everything, every lie, every manipulation, every act of betrayal. I gathered evidence, I recorded conversations, I pieced together the puzzle of their deception, slowly uncovering the full extent of their treachery. The deeper I dug, the more I realized that this wasn't just a one-time affair. This was a carefully orchestrated conspiracy, a long-term plan to undermine me and steal everything I held dear. And as I uncovered their secrets, I discovered their weakness, their arrogance, their belief that they were untouchable, that they could get away with anything. That was their fatal flaw, and it would be their downfall. The silence of the empty house pressed in on me, suffocating me more than any scream could. Every corner held a memory, each now tainted with the bitter taste of deception. Lily's laughter, once a constant melody, was now just an echo in my mind, a reminder of what I had lost. My career, my friends, even my sense of self, all seemed distant, irrelevant in the face of this gaping wound. I wandered aimlessly through the rooms, touching familiar objects as if to reassure myself that they were real, that I was real. But the reality was stark and undeniable. My life was a lie, built on a foundation of betrayal and deceit. I sank to the floor in the living room, the weight of my despair crushing me. The Christmas tree, once a symbol of joy and togetherness, now loomed over me like a grotesque mockery, its glittering ornaments reflecting my broken reflection. I wanted to disappear, to cease to exist, to escape the pain that was consuming me. The temptation to just give up, to let them win, was almost overwhelming. But then, a flicker of defiance ignited within me, a tiny spark of resolve that refused to be extinguished. I thought of Lily, her small face etched with confusion and terror, her innocent heart shattered by my mother's cruelty. I thought of the years of emotional neglect I had endured, the constant feeling of being second best, the gnawing sense that I was never good enough. And I realized that I couldn't let them get away with it. I couldn't let them destroy another life, another innocent soul. I owed it to Lily, and I owed it to myself to fight back. The switch flipped.
The tears dried, and a cold calmness descended. It was not the peace of acceptance, but the quiet before a storm. I stood, the resolve hardening me like steel. I would not break. I would dismantle their lives piece by piece, just as they had meticulously dismantled mine. My first act was methodical. I shut down all emotions and reviewed what I knew. The affair, the lie about Lily's parentage, these were weapons, but not the war. I needed to know the why. What did they gain? What was the end game? I started with David's finances. He'd always been vague about his investments, trusting me to handle the household budget while he managed the big picture. The big picture, it turned out, was a canvas of lies. There were offshore accounts, shell corporations, and a series of shady transactions that painted a clear picture. David was embezzling funds from his company, and Bethany was in on it. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. They hadn't just betrayed me emotionally, they had been systematically robbing me blind for years. My vision blurred, the rage threatening to consume me. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm. Anger was a weapon, but it needed to be controlled, focused. I documented everything, meticulously cataloging each transaction, each shell company, each hidden account. The evidence mounted, a damning indictment of their greed and treachery. But the money was just the beginning. As I dug deeper, I uncovered a web of deceit that extended far beyond their financial crimes. There were forged documents, falsified records, and a series of carefully orchestrated manipulations designed to isolate me from my friends and family. They had been systematically dismantling my life for years, slowly poisoning the well, turning everyone against me. My mother, I realized with a sickening certainty, was the mastermind behind it all. She had always resented me, always favored Bethany, always sought to undermine my happiness. And now she had finally succeeded, orchestrating the ultimate betrayal, shattering my life into a million pieces. The depth of their cruelty was staggering, their capacity for malice seemingly limitless. For a moment, I wavered, overwhelmed by the sheer enormity of their wickedness. But then I thought of Lily again, her innocent face a beacon of hope in the darkness. I couldn't let them win. I wouldn't. I owed it to her and I owed it to myself to make them pay for what they had done. The spark of resolve hardened into a flame, burning bright and unwavering. I smiled, a cold, mirthless smile that sent a shiver down my own spine. They thought they had broken me. They thought they had won, but they were wrong. The game had just begun.
I rose from the floor, no longer a victim, but a warrior. The house, once a symbol of my shattered dreams, now felt like a command center, a place of strategic planning and meticulous execution. The decorations were still up, but now they seemed like camouflage, hiding the steely resolve that had taken root within me. I started to see their weaknesses, the cracks in their perfect facade. Bethany's insatiable need for validation, David's crippling fear of failure, and my mother's insatiable hunger for control. These were their vulnerabilities, their Achilles' heels, and I would exploit them mercilessly. I spent days poring over documents, analyzing financial records, and gathering evidence. I contacted old friends, former colleagues, and anyone who might have information about David and Bethany's shady dealings. Slowly but surely, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, revealing a clear picture of their treachery. As I uncovered their secrets, my anger grew, but so did my determination. I would not rest until they had paid for what they had done, until their lives were as shattered as mine. I started to meticulously plan my revenge, carefully considering every detail, anticipating every possible outcome. I knew that I had to be patient, that I had to bide my time, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. And when that opportunity came, I would not hesitate. I would unleash the full force of my fury, and I would make them regret the day they ever crossed me. I was no longer the naive, trusting woman they had betrayed. I was a force to be reckoned with, and they would soon find that out the hard way. I smiled, a cold, calculating smile that promised retribution. The hunter had become the hunted. The game had begun, and I intended to win. They thought they were clever, untouchable, but I was about to show them just how wrong they were. My plan was intricate, a carefully woven tapestry of deception and retribution, designed to unravel their lives thread by thread. I started by focusing on David's embezzlement. I knew that if I could expose his crimes, it would not only ruin him financially, but also land him in jail. I spent hours poring over his financial records, tracing the flow of money from his company to the offshore accounts. It was like following a breadcrumb trail, each transaction leading me closer to the truth. I needed irrefutable evidence, something that would stand up in court and leave no room for doubt. So I hired a forensic accountant, a specialist in uncovering financial fraud. She was discreet and professional, and she understood the importance of keeping everything confidential. Together, we meticulously documented every transaction, every shell corporation, every hidden account. The evidence was damning, a clear and irrefutable indictment of David's greed and treachery. But exposing David's embezzlement was just the first step. I also needed to deal with Bethany and my mother. They were just as guilty as David, and they deserved to pay for their crimes. Bethany's weakness was her insatiable need for validation. She craved attention and admiration, and she would do anything to get it. I decided to use that against her. I started spreading rumors about her, subtle whispers that questioned her character and her motives. I knew that she would hear them eventually, and that they would eat away at her, fueling her insecurities and driving them to desperation. The rumors were carefully crafted to exploit her deepest fears, hinting at her professional incompetence and questioning the true parentage of Lily. The seed of doubt was planted. My mother, on the other hand, was driven by a thirst for control. She needed to be in charge, to manipulate and control everyone around her. I decided to undermine her authority, to expose her lies, and to reveal her true nature to the world. I started by subtly challenging her decisions, questioning her motives, and pointing out her inconsistencies. I knew that it would infuriate her, but I also knew that it would force her to reveal her true colors. The hardest part of the plan was dealing with Lily. I knew that my actions would have a profound impact on her life, and I didn't want to cause her any more pain, but I also knew that I couldn't protect her from the truth forever. She deserved to know who her real parents were, and she deserved to be free from the toxic environment that my mother had created. I decided to wait until the time was right, until I had gathered all the evidence and was ready to strike. I would then sit down with her and explain everything in a way that she could understand.
I would assure her that none of this was her fault and that I would always be there for her, no matter what. In the meantime, I focused on building a strong and loving relationship with her, showering her with affection and support. I wanted her to know that she was loved, that she was safe, and that she would always have a place in my heart. There were close calls, moments when my carefully constructed facade almost crumbled. Bethany, sensing that something was amiss, started to question me more closely, probing for weaknesses. My mother, growing suspicious of my newfound confidence, began to monitor my movements, trying to uncover my secrets. But I remained calm and collected, always one step ahead of them. I anticipated their moves, I deflected their questions, and I maintained my charade of innocence.
One evening, Bethany confronted me directly, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "What are you up to, Cora?" she demanded, her voice sharp and accusing. "You've been acting strange lately, like you're hiding something." I met her gaze steadily, my face a mask of composure. "I don't know what you're talking about, Bethany," I said, my voice calm and even. "I'm just trying to get my life back on track after everything that's happened." She didn't believe me. I could see it in her eyes. But she couldn't prove anything. And without proof, she was powerless. I smiled inwardly, savoring my small victory. The anticipation was building. The tension was palpable. I knew that the time was coming soon, that I would finally be able to unleash my plan and watch their world crumble around them. The thought filled me with a mixture of excitement and dread. I knew that what I was about to do would change everything, that there would be no going back. But I also knew that it was the right thing to do, that they deserved to pay for their crimes. I spent hours reviewing my plan, making sure that every detail was perfect, that there were no loose ends. I knew that I had to be meticulous, that I had to anticipate every possible outcome. The stakes were too high to leave anything to chance. I purchased a small, discreet camera, disguised as a pen, and began recording my conversations with David, Bethany, and my mother. I needed to have a record of their lies, their manipulations, their admissions of guilt. The camera was my silent witness, capturing every word, every gesture, every subtle nuance of their deception. The evidence was mounting, a damning indictment of their treachery. I felt a surge of power, a sense of control that I hadn't felt in years. I was no longer a victim. I was a force to be reckoned with, and they were about to find that out the hard way. The break came unexpectedly, like a crack of thunder on a clear day. I was reviewing David's company's financial statements when I noticed a recurring payment to a small, obscure firm in the Cayman Islands. The name was unfamiliar, but the amount was substantial. It was a consistent drain, a steady bleed from the company coffers. I dug deeper, tracing the transaction back to its source. It led me to a series of shell corporations, each one more convoluted and opaque than the last. And then I found it, a document buried deep within the digital labyrinth, a contract outlining a secret agreement between David and a major competitor. They were deliberately sabotaging his own company from the inside out. The competitor was paying him handsomely to drive down stock prices, paving the way for a hostile takeover. He was selling out his employees, his shareholders, and everyone who had ever trusted him, all for a quick payday. The betrayal was staggering, a level of depravity that I hadn't even imagined possible. My vision blurred, the glass in my hand shattered, the crimson droplets mingling with the ink on the damning document. I knew I had them. This was it, the smoking gun, the irrefutable proof of their guilt. My mind raced, formulating the final stages of my plan. I needed to lure them into a trap, a situation where they would be forced to confess their crimes, where they would have no escape. I decided to organize a family dinner, a seemingly innocent gathering designed to celebrate Lily's upcoming birthday. I would invite David, Bethany, and my mother, creating a false sense of normalcy and security. They would suspect nothing, lulled into a false sense of complacency by my apparent acceptance of the situation. But beneath the surface, I would be carefully orchestrating their downfall. I prepared the house meticulously, ensuring that every detail was perfect. I wanted them to feel comfortable, relaxed, completely unaware of the storm that was about to break. I set the table with our finest china, arranged the flowers in elegant displays, and prepared a lavish meal, their favorite dishes. I even put on some soft music, creating a soothing ambiance that would put them at ease. But hidden beneath the veneer of domesticity, I was setting a trap. I had installed hidden cameras throughout the house, disguised as ordinary objects: a pen on the desk, a picture frame on the wall, a flower vase on the mantelpiece. These cameras would record everything, capturing their every word, their every gesture, their every expression. And I had prepared a series of questions, carefully designed to elicit the truth, to expose their lies, to force them to confront the consequences of their actions. As the evening approached, I felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. I knew that this was it, the moment of truth. Everything that I had worked for, everything that I had sacrificed, was about to come to fruition. I took a deep breath, steeling my nerves, preparing myself for the confrontation that was to come. David arrived first, his face etched with a nervous smile. He seemed uneasy, as if he sensed that something was amiss, but he couldn't put his finger on it. I greeted him warmly, offering him a drink and engaging him in polite conversation. I wanted to lull him into a false sense of security, to make him believe that everything was normal. Bethany arrived next, her eyes scanning the room suspiciously. She seemed even more on edge than David, her movements jerky and her voice strained. I could tell that she suspected something, that she was waiting for the other shoe to drop, but she couldn't know what I had planned. My mother arrived last, her face a mask of composure. She seemed confident, in control, completely unaware of the danger that she was in. I greeted her with a smile, leading her into the living room and offering her a seat. As we sat down to dinner, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction.
They were all here, gathered together in one room, completely at my mercy. The game was about to begin. The conversation flowed smoothly at first, a superficial exchange of pleasantries and small talk. But beneath the surface, the tension was palpable, a silent undercurrent of suspicion and unease. I started to steer the conversation towards David's company, subtly probing for information, dropping carefully chosen hints that would pique his interest. He took the bait, eagerly launching into a detailed explanation of his latest business ventures, his voice filled with pride and confidence. But as he spoke, I noticed a flicker of nervousness in his eyes, a subtle shift in his demeanor that betrayed his unease. I pressed him further, asking him about the company's financial performance, about the recent decline in stock prices, about the rumors of a potential takeover. His answers became increasingly evasive, his voice strained and his eyes darting nervously around the room. I knew I was getting close. Then I turned my attention to Bethany, asking her about her career, about her ambitions, about her relationship with Lily. Her face hardened, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. She answered my questions curtly, her voice laced with sarcasm and defensiveness. I could see that she was growing increasingly uncomfortable, that she was starting to realize that this dinner was not what it seemed. Finally, I turned to my mother, asking her about her past, about her regrets, about her relationship with me. Her face remained impassive, her eyes cold and distant. She answered my questions with carefully chosen words, her voice devoid of emotion. But beneath the surface, I could sense a flicker of fear, a hint of vulnerability that betrayed her true feelings. I knew I was pushing them to their limits, that they were on the verge of breaking. I could feel the tension building in the room, the air growing thick with anticipation. The storm was about to break. And then, just as I was about to unleash the full force of my plan, Lily walked into the room, her eyes wide with excitement, her face beaming with joy. "Mommy, Mommy," she exclaimed, running towards me and throwing her arms around my neck. "Guess what? I learned a new song today." She looked at David, Bethany, and my mother, her face radiating pure innocence. "Can I sing it for everyone?" My heart sank. I couldn't do it. Not with her here. Not in front of her. I had to protect her, shield her from the darkness that was about to engulf us all. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "But maybe later, okay? We're just finishing up dinner." As Lily began to sing, oblivious to the tension that filled the room, my carefully constructed plan threatened to unravel. But then, as if on cue, my phone rang, shattering the fragile peace. I glanced at the screen, my heart leaping into my throat. It was the forensic accountant. "I have something you need to see," she said, her voice urgent. "It's about David's company, and it's explosive." My pulse quickened,
a surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins. This was it, the final piece of the puzzle, the key that would unlock everything. "I'll be right there," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I hung up the phone, my mind racing. I had to leave, to meet with the accountant, to get my hands on the evidence. But I couldn't just walk out, not without arousing suspicion. I needed an excuse, something plausible, something that would allow me to slip away unnoticed. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice carefully controlled. "But I have to go. There's an emergency at work. I need to take care of it right away." David, Bethany, and my mother exchanged glances, their eyes filled with suspicion. But they couldn't stop me, not now. "I'll be back as soon as I can," I said, grabbing my purse and heading for the door. "Please, make yourselves at home." As I stepped out into the night, I felt a surge of exhilaration. The trap had been set, the bait had been taken, and now it was time to spring the trap. The final act was about to begin. I sped to the accountant's office, the city lights blurring into streaks of yellow and white. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. The accountant handed me a thick file, her expression grim. Inside were documents detailing David's elaborate scheme, offshore accounts, falsified reports, and signed agreements with a competitor. The level of his deceit was breathtaking. I felt a cold satisfaction wash over me. It was time. I raced back home, my mind churning with the final details of my plan. When I arrived, David, Bethany, and my mother were still there, sitting stiffly in the living room. Lily was asleep upstairs. I walked in, holding the file. The silence was thick enough to cut with a knife. "I know everything," I said, my voice steady and cold. I opened the file and tossed the documents onto the coffee table. David's face paled, a sheen of sweat breaking out on his forehead. Bethany's eyes widened in disbelief. My mother's expression remained unchanged, but I could see a flicker of something, fear, perhaps, in her eyes.
I laid out the evidence, piece by piece, starting with David's treachery. I showed them the contracts, the bank statements, the emails. I revealed how he had been systematically sabotaging his own company, lining his pockets while everyone else suffered. David tried to deny it, to bluster and deflect, but the evidence was overwhelming. He was trapped. Then I turned to Bethany. I played a recording of her conversation with my mother, the one where they plotted to undermine my sanity, to drive me over the edge. I watched as her face crumbled, her carefully constructed facade of innocence shattering into a million pieces. Her denials were weak, pathetic. Finally, I confronted my mother. I presented the evidence of her manipulations, her lies, her relentless need for control. I showed them how she had poisoned Lily's mind, how she had tried to turn her against me. I revealed the truth about Lily's parentage, the secret she had kept hidden for so long. My mother remained silent, her face a mask of cold fury, but I could see the defeat in her eyes. She knew that she had lost. The room erupted. David started shouting, accusing me of betrayal, of ruining his life. Bethany burst into tears, begging for forgiveness, claiming that she had only been trying to protect Lily. My mother sat silently, her eyes burning with rage. I watched them, my heart filled with a cold, detached satisfaction. They had destroyed my life, and now I was returning the favor. But there was no joy in it, no sense of triumph, only a hollow emptiness. As the police led David away in handcuffs, as Bethany sobbed uncontrollably, as my mother stared blankly into space, I felt nothing. They had lost everything, their reputations, their freedom, their family. They were ruined. Lily woke up to a house filled with chaos. I sat her down, held her close, and told her the truth, as gently as I could. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to do, but she deserved to know. The days that followed were a blur of legal proceedings, media scrutiny, and family drama. The truth came out, the whole ugly mess exposed for the world to see. David's company collapsed, his reputation in tatters. Bethany was ostracized, her career in ruins. My mother retreated into herself, isolated and alone. I picked up the pieces of my life, slowly and painfully. It wasn't easy. The scars ran deep. But I was free. Free from their lies, their manipulations, their control. I focused on Lily, on rebuilding their lives together. I showered her with love and support,
determined to create a safe and stable environment for her. It took time, but we healed. We moved away, started fresh, and I finally found peace. They lost everything. I just smiled. Revenge isn't sweet. It's necessary. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.